Good afternoon, everyone. We have a wonderful live audience here with distinguished speaker, and I'm Shifu Chen, intern dean of engineering school. Wonderful to have this in-person and hybrid distinguished lecture of our CAIT Center, CAIT, Columbia AI Technology Center, generously sponsored by Amazon. And I think we have our wonderful audience also online, many of them are from Amazon. So welcome to this lecture. So this is the distinguished lecture series of CAIT, and I think this is the first one this year, right? And it's so thrilling. That's right. And we try to keep this one once every 3 months. So we have a few last year, wonderful response, wonderful speakers. So this year, wonderful to start with Professor Julia Hirschberg. Let me introduce her bio. It's a long one, but I'm trying to condense it. She is a Percy and Vida Hassan Professor of Computer Science at Columbia Engineering and also an Amazon scholar. So for those of you online from Amazon, welcome to this series. She previously worked at Bell Lab and AT&T Laboratory on text-to-speech synthesis and created the first HCI research department in AT&T. And she has served on the ACL Executive Board, ISCA Board, the WP Board. And she was the editor for Computational Linguistics and Speech Communication, is a member of National Academy of Engineering, a member of American Academy of Arts and Science, American Philosophical Society. It's wonderful list of recognition. And she received the IEEE James Flanagan Speech and Audio Processing Award, ISCA Medal for Scientific Achievement, and ISCA Special Service Medal. She worked for diversity for many years at AT&T and also at Columbia University in the department, in a school across the university. Is leading this important effort. She studied speech and NLP, natural language processing, currently focused on TTS, text-to-speech, false information on social media and its intent, which I have the privilege to work with her team. Really enjoy that wonderful project. Multimodal humor, radicalization in videos, and deceptive, trusted, emotional, charismatic, and empathetic speech, which is the topic she's going to talk about, how to convey empathy in conversation. Welcome, Julia. It's our privilege.
Thank you very much, Shifu. It's lovely to be here and see all your students and everybody else who's out there. So today, as Shifu said, I'm going to be talking about some work that we are just starting on empathetic speech that I became interested in about a year ago. And so I've done a lot of reading on it and a lot of work to put things together for you today. So here is my lab, the Columbia Speech Lab, back when we could actually be in person. And this was a couple of years ago, I'm afraid. But as you see, I had a large group and it was very diverse and really wonderful. And I still have a large group now. We're just meeting on Zoom. So what I want to start with is talking about dialogue systems of the future and how they could get better. So as you all know, I'm sure, dialogue systems have come a long way in the past decade since Siri started in 2011 and Alexa in 2014. And so what's happened is, since the time that I've been interested in them, they become much more flexible and a lot more useful for accomplishing tasks and also for just chatting with people. But there's still a lot of room for improvement, as we all know, those of us who use them. How can we adapt them to the needs of individual users, for example? That would be a challenging and pretty good project. How could we incentivize users to engage more? A lot of people are very interested in that. And how can we improve the overall user experience? I'm sure all of you have had some times when it didn't quite work right for you, and you'd really like to make that better. So a possible solution that I'm predicting would be maybe our dialogue systems need to become more empathetic. So today I'm going to talk about these topics pardon me, what is empathy and what is empathy in dialogue? How do we define it? What kind of empathetic behavior has actually been produced in early conversational agents? What's the current state of the art in empathetic agents? What are the ethical challenges? For there are a few. I'll mention those as well. And what still needs to be done so that we can really develop conversational agents that are more empathetic. So for this first topic, I'm going to talk about some definitions of empathy for their multiple ones. I'm going to talk about some examples in conversation between systems and humans, why we should produce more empathetic agents, and how can we actually go about creating these. So let's first talk about how we define empathy. So of course, there are many definitions. This is a social science phenomenon, and there are always many definitions. Some of these appear in the first bullet there, social resonance. I'm not going to go through, but some people call it social glue, interactional synchrony, and some people, a lot of people who develop empathetic avatars talk about them as being avatars that can convey rapport with the people they're talking to. So more generally, over all these definitions, empathy is the ability to understand other people's feelings as if we were sort of having them ourselves, really feeling with someone. And I'm sure all of you who talk with your friends who have problems sometimes probably understand how that works and why you should be feeling with someone. And also being able to put yourself in their place as if you were them and feeling their feelings. So this is a kind of general definition of empathy that we have to actually produce in our conversational agents if we can. So here are some of the different forms that people have identified and actually tried to produce in empathetic agents. There's something called cognitive empathy. That's more like perspective taking, being able to see somebody else's perspective and put yourself in their place. And this is a very useful skill, as we'll talk about later, for business managers, because then they are able to convince their managees that they really understand them, they feel for their problems and their difficulties, and they can help. There's also something called emotional empathy. And this has often been seen as something that's not too good to be able to create. This is a personal distress, or it's also called emotional contagion. It can be good if you can understand the other person's emotions and respond appropriately, but apparently a lot of people just get empathy overload and they become depressed as the person they're talking to. Not good. So there's another kind of empathy, which is the one that we're really trying to identify and work on now in my group. This is compassionate empathy. It's kind of like the other two, but basically it's feeling somebody else's pain and taking action to help mitigate their problems. So it's not necessarily feeling as bad as they do, but it's understanding how bad they feel. Usually people don't just want you to understand or just feel their pain and burst into tears. They want you to understand and help them. And that makes a lot of sense, not only for us humans, but also for conversational agents. There's some other kinds that I don't know much about, something called somatic empathy. Apparently some people can actually feel when somebody else is actually feeling hurt somewhere, the other person can actually feel hurt in the same place. Has anyone ever experienced that?
There's an experiment where they put a fake hand and they try to chop that fake hand and your real hand actually goes up.
Okay,
so
thank you. All right, so some people have experienced this. I think I may have a couple of times, but then there's something called spiritual empathy, and that's connecting with a higher being, mostly through meditation. So that's another form, but we're not going to talk anymore about those two. We're going to mainly focus on compassionate empathy. So here's some conversational examples. I always like to give these of the empathy in conversation. So A says, "How are you doing today?" U says, "I'm not feeling so great." A says, "I'm sorry to hear that. Can you tell me more about how you are feeling?" I'm trying to be empathetic here. Then another one, A says, and this is really a bad one, "How are you doing today?" And U says, "Pretty bad. I just lost my dear cat." Many of us can empathize with that one. How awful. It's so hard to lose a pet you love. And the third one is, "How are you doing today?" This is a good one. "I'm just so bored with working from home," as I'm sure a lot of us feel. Totally understand. Is there anything we can provide to help? We can recommend great movies or videos to watch, etc., etc. So these are just some examples. Now, these are some other examples taken from a pretty large database that was collected a while back, and I think about 2018, and was labeled in 2019. And it was basically, there were 500 responses in dialogues in which Turkers were asked to respond to in an empathetic way to conversations. And about half of them, you'll see, are reacting to positive feelings, and a fewer are reacting to negative feelings. So some of them I'll just mention quickly, but if you look at these, there's questioning, acknowledging. That sounds like double good news. It was probably fun having your hard work rewarded. Agreeing, that's a great feeling, I agree. Consoling, which is more like what we think of as empathetic. But happy feelings can be too. And this one, I hope he gets the help he needs. And as you see further down here, there are about 15 different ones, but a lot of them really do. Like, I hope the surgery went well successfully and with no hassle. And this one, maybe you too should go to the pet store to try and find a new dog for him. So as you see, there's a lot of similarity between some of these categories, particularly some of the ones that are consoling or encouraging or sympathizing, expressing care, pretty much the same thing. But anyhow, these were the categories that were chosen to annotate these.
see denote here.
What's that?
So what the frequency denotes here, like appreciating seems a very good empathic way for someone, but it has a very low frequency.
Yes, that's a very good point. If you look at the top ones, they're the most common, and that's questioning and acknowledging. And it may simply be that those were the ones that the people who were replying to these were able to express. So maybe it's a lot easier to do that. You never know with Turkers. At any rate, now here's a fun one that I always like to talk about. These are nonverbal ways to express empathy and camaraderie with your team. And these are the kind of things that people in industry all go for and try to get maybe a YouTube video or something to train them in how to do this. So here are some of the things that were mentioned in Forbes in 2018. This is what you should do if you're a manager. And this might be good for everyone to know, depending on who you manage. You practice engaged and active listening without taking notes. Now that's interesting. You sit next to your teammates instead of at the head of the table. I'm sure Shifu, you like all of these. You adopt empathetic mannerisms, square shoulders, soft eye contact, head nods, arms at your side, and you reflect back what you have heard to the people who spoke to you. Now, this is a good one we can all try. You raise your eyebrows slightly, squeeze your cheeks, purse your lips, and tilt your head. Try it. You can also mirror the other person's body language, or relax your face is always good. And getting out from behind your desk, if you're a manager, is a very good thing to do. Very, very good thing to do. I know this from much experience in other people getting out from behind their desks. Be truly present in the conversation. Open your palms. Convey respect through handshake, smile, and gaze, and sincerely smile and slowly nod. And this is one of the things, I don't know if you can see what I'm doing, but I'm putting my hands out. This is one of the things that industry people get taught a lot. You should do this. It shows that you're open to the other person and to what they have to say. So all of those are useful tips. So the question here is, why do we want to produce empathy in humans or in conversational agents? Because both of these are trained in similar ways, perhaps. We want to encourage the users to like the agent more, always good, think they're smarter, take their advice, want to speak with them more, and buffer consequences when the agent makes a mistake. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. We also want to establish, all these things are pretty obvious, social bonds. We don't want to have any conflict. We want to be able to persuade people, improve workplace cohesion, and elevate test performance as well, and develop rapport. So there's a lot of evidence that humans are indeed influenced by empathetic behavior, even when they know if the agent is a computer, and I'll talk about that a bit later. So really successful methods in empathy depend not just on the topic you're talking about, but the characteristics of the user. And this is going to be the hard thing for empathetic agents to be able to produce, because you have to understand something about the user behavior, like their personality, what kind of facial expressions they use so you can recognize them, and what their gesture norms are. Also, of course, there's an important thing. Are you the boss or are you the managee? Or that would be the most relative power sort of thing that you would have. I don't think you would have that with a conversational agents that you're talking to, but maybe you think that you're superior to the person, the agent that you're talking to. And also, one interesting thing, and that's something that we're interested in exploring ourselves, is differences in cultural norms for empathy. Because as you all probably know, there are differences in cultural norms for emotion expression. And so there are probably differences for empathy expression as well. So what kind of thing do we need to know about the user, and can we get this information? Like, what type of input does the user produce? Like what kind of vocabulary do they have? That's pretty specific. What kind of syntax do they use? And what kind of speech, expression, and gestures? This is so you can recognize from them what they're feeling, but also if you're having some success in conveying that you're empathetic. You also need to know mood, and this is about just all the normal kinds of emotion, but in particular, happy, sad, angry, frustrated, confused, and uncertain all may require empathetic behavior. And these have to be detected from the user themselves, right? So that's another issue in trying to produce an empathetic agent. And you also need to know what the topic is, of course. And it's very important to understand different dialogue acts. Like, when can you actually cut in? Because a lot of times it's okay to slightly overlap with the person you're talking to. That makes you sound more empathetic. Sometimes it's not, depends on how they're feeling. But also you have to know when back channels are appropriate. These are things like saying, yeah, okay, right, okay, okay. Okay, here's some more challenging ones. And these are things like the goal of the user. That's a big deal, because that's pretty important in empathy, right? You have to understand what the user's goal is in order to be able to help them. Also, pretty good if you could understand their personality And some people have actually collected data on this to try to understand a person's personality, as well as to detect some results of empathy by developing storytelling events. So that's a popular issue. Stories can reveal differences in these traits. So here's what we need to produce. So all of this means it's going to be really difficult to produce empathetic conversation, but we're hoping we can get there. So first of all, in text, we have to produce some entrainment. Entrainment is when you start talking like the other person, in terms of not only your speaking rate, your pitch, but also the words that you use. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. In speech, you need to do back channels and also some entrainment. And as I mentioned before, some overlapping speech, a little bit. It's usually less than 2 seconds of overlap, or I think it's 0.2 milliseconds actually, sorry. So that's a very tiny amount, but it actually makes a difference. Also, you need to do something in facial expression, in head movement and gesture. So all of these things will also convey the appropriate sentiment or emotion of the person you're talking to. So now I'm going to mention just a couple of pieces on how entrainment, I think, is related to empathy. So my group has been working on entrainment since 2011, 2010. So entrainment is a great thing to understand in dialogue systems because it's non-conscious mimicry of the postures, mannerisms, facial expressions, and other behaviors of your partner. So it's not just talking like them, but it's also behaving like them in other ways as well, in facial expression and mannerism. It occurs in multiple modalities. There's information, there are lots and lots of data collected on lexical entrainment, syntactic entrainment, phonological and phonetic, sociocultural, jokes and laughter. You actually entrain, if somebody starts laughing, you'll laugh more. Very interesting. It's a way of getting people to laugh yourself. Facial expression, gesture, and even brain oscillation, apparently. So there's a lot of evidence. Why is entrainment important? Well, people who entrain are perceived as more socially attractive, more competent, more encouraging, more likable, and engaged. The conversations, and this has been demonstrated many times by sociologists, sociolinguists, and also computational linguists, that conversations are perceived as more successful. So it's something you might think about doing. So entrainment should be quite useful for producing empathetic conversations, but not always. When do you not want to entrain to the person you're trying to be empathetic with? If they're angry. Don't be angry yourself. Not a good idea. Anyhow, these are the different modalities that I mentioned before that entrainment can occur in. And we've worked mostly in the acoustic-prosodic and lexical one, but a lot of other people have been doing this for many years. So entrainment could be a good aspect of empathy, but you have to take it in a certain way. So how do you usually measure whether an agent has been successful empathetically? So there are subjective ratings, and a bunch of people have developed corpora that they've had subjects rate, either just for positive or negative when they had people having conversations that were supposed to be empathetic, but also you can rate rapport, social presence, helpfulness, distraction, or naturalness. You can have people rate all of those things. Some are more useful when you're rating it in avatars than when you're rating it in just conversational agents. But yeah, but a lot of work has been done on that. Also, an interesting thing is how much personal information does the person disclose? Because that could be a good idea of what it means to be empathetic. Also positive facial expression, and when you're gazing mutually at each other and not just looking off in the corner somewhere. There's also probably the easiest things that we found to measure are the length of a user response, like how long does a user take in their response? Longer is better. How fluent is it? How many filled pauses and self-repairs? These are things like and what I mean to say, what I meant to say, those kind of things. Those are when people are trying to change up their conversation. The length of user interaction. This is probably the easiest one ever for conversational agents. How long is the person interacting with this conversational agent? That means they're probably more empathetic. And how often do they use that particular dialogue system? So is this enough? For healthcare agents, are they successful? Do people get healthier? And some people have found that they do. For shopping, do people purchase more? This I do not know. Although I guess if you are actually going shopping in person and the person that at the counter is a really nice person, and I guess that's how they get you to buy something, quite possibly. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some people who've actually produced empathetic behavior in early conversational agents. Go very quickly over the early conversational agents. I don't know if everybody has heard about Eliza, but you can still use her. She was the earliest rule-based chatbot that we have. Sorry about this. And actually, people often thought she was human. I won't read this to you, but she was very good. And she didn't use much useful information at all, except just what words the user said. Now, she might seem more empathetic if she appeared as a human in voice, face, and movement. So Justine Cassell addressed a similar question way back in 2001. She said that conversational agents should be represented as human beings in cases where social collaborative behavior was key. So she invented Rhea, FMBT, which I can't remember what it was, a female robot, of course, a conversational agent who imitated human glancing and head nods, hand gestures, and eyebrows. And this is a picture of Rhea as she was being used in virtual reality. So there were many other such things. This is a picture of a virtual laboratory exercise agents that came a few years after Justine. And actually, these agents were shown to be quite successful in encouraging people, older people, to exercise. And they just acted like human beings as best they could. And mainly, the success came from them using autobiographical conversational storytelling, because this gave their information to the person who was listening to them, and the person was more likely to come back with their information about what their health issues were and why they needed to walk more, et cetera, et cetera. Here's just a picture of some empathetic visual avatars, facial expression avatars. And the ones that were most successful in producing empathy, according to people who rated them, were the ones on the upper left and the lower left. And these are the ones who look saddest, right? So sadness was a good way to emote. Here's another one. This was the same people created Jade semantic agents to produce emotion from analysis of human-machine interactions to give users information about their email empathetically. So the user was supposed to share their email, and then the agent was supposed to reply in an empathetic way, no matter what that email was. And this actually increased what empathy had to do to deal with not only user satisfaction, but also frustration, sadness, irritation, anger. So it wasn't just, make them happy or make them appreciate that you understand that they're sad, but deal with a whole lot of other emotions. And here are some other, so there was a lot of work on this. These were different conversational settings for agents, and there were news readers, and there were sellers and buyers, and that was particularly something that empathy was a plus for. And this was the one in the bottom there on the right is shifting from face-to-face dialogues to multi-party dialogues to produce empathetic behavior, which is a bigger deal, as you can well imagine, because different people may be feeling differently. So the main thing that previous empathetic agents were produced for was to have produced rapport. And this was just to provide users with feelings of engagement. And I won't go into all of these things, but they were mostly like cognitive empathy, being able to put yourself in their place, but not specifically concerned with addressing the user's problems. So it was a different kind of empathy, but there were a lot of avatars, as we can see here, that were produced to try to do this. And most interestingly, these avatars were produced mostly through facial expression and gesture. Very little except beyond text. So there was no speech empathy that they were supposed to produce. It was very strange, but that's true of most of these avatars. They didn't care about speech so much as gesture, facial expression, and basically what you said, but not how you said it. And here's another one as well. This was quite successful actually in producing better feedback, but it still wasn't perfect in terms of empathetic behavior. Now, this is one of the last ones I'm going to talk about. This was the SimSensi kiosk. It was a virtual human that was developed for healthcare support in 2014. And this avatar, as she was, could identify distress, indicators of depression, anxiety, and PTSD. They compared her success with that of a human agent that did the same thing. And interestingly enough, they found that people felt more comfortable with the avatar than the human. They were more able to express their own personal feelings and tell about their own problems. It's really interesting. So they felt more rapport with this Wizard of Oz interviewer. And here's something that shows that empathy can backfire on you. So there was an attempt to make a robot empathetic. And what people found was that it did make people who dealt with the robot more trustworthy. But when the robot made a mistake in what he said or what he suggested, they got even worse. They were even less trustworthy than if he hadn't been empathetic at all, which is a very interesting thing. So be careful when you're being empathetic that you can continue also not only being empathetic, but telling them the right thing. Okay, so current state of the art, I'll go through pretty quickly because there isn't a lot, but some early work produced the empathetic behavior we've been talking about. And current interesting focus on healthcare issues and also the issues like time management, as well as recommending products, movies, and songs, and simple chat. So we'll mention also that some ethical concerns, which you can imagine have arisen as these agents and avatars have been used more widely. So here's one that a friend of mine, Pascal Fung's lab, created, Nora, the empathetic psychologist, to screen users for stress, anxiety, and depression. And it was actually relatively successful. They used 4 empathy scores. and they extracted these from audio and lexical features. So that's something we're also planning to do, is to be able to extract empathetic features from audio and lexical features. This is pretty interesting. I don't know if anybody's ever used this. I did call it once. This is a Wobot. It's a talk therapy phone chatbot app to help people monitor their moods. It was founded at Stanford, so it's quite good sort of thing. It's been going on for a while. They actually did a study using 36,000 users who received this app therapy. And they showed that scores were comparable to those using traditional cognitive behavior therapy, or so they thought. But the healthcare professionals were quite concerned about this because it wasn't really human or empathetic. It was used in short phone calls. And what they were really worried about was that people would talk to this Wobot and think they had done all they could and not get real mental illness being fixed by a psychiatrist or psychologist. Here's some empathetic corpora that I think I mentioned before. There's this one data set of 80 pairs of actors telling each other fictional stories. And listeners were the only thing that's wrong with this data set. And we're going to see if we can actually get this one and if it's useful, because it was put out for public use for this challenge. But they only assessed the listeners for valence, that is not empathy particularly, but is it positive, negative, or neutral? So we could do something else with that, we think. And then Hannah Rashkin and her colleagues created some empathetic dialogues in text conversations, and we saw some examples of those earlier. So those were the many different empathetic categories. So here's some current agents that seem to be doing quite well. So Microsoft has a group called Emma, Human Understanding and Empathy is what they work on. And it's a phone app too. It's kind of a, well, it uses phone sensor data, like where you are, what the time of day is, and how far you are from work or from home to predict your mood. And they plan to act more information that they're going to want to collect if they can. And this is their social contact data. So they did an evaluation over 2 weeks on 39 people who actually use this. And they did find a few useful things, didn't like the agent to interrupt if they were happy, possibly when they were sad, but not when they were happy. And short, simple things were better received. And anyhow, it was better to have some contextual relevance. So it seems like the agent went that using this kind of data wasn't always as aware as it could have been of the things that it needed to know to really work with these people well. So anyhow, Emma could provide appropriate responses to happy, calm, agitated, or sad people, they said. And it does tell the users what she's collecting as far as data goes. And this is something that's important for the next topic that we'll be discussing, which is what are the ethical challenges? So they also created something called focus agents to reduce worker stress. And they access users' calendars and did facial analysis to provide an empathetic avatar that could actually help the users. And they found that this was somewhat successful. They also created a virtual agent that entrained to users, matching them in their the way they were speaking. And this, I think, was an empathetic addition, but they haven't got any data on how useful or important this was, as far as I know. So the next thing is ethics. And I don't know if you can see this, but if you can actually see what's being said there, but there's some really bad things that this agent is saying to the user, like, would you kill a human? and various other things. You can look at the things. I'm not going to read them because they're pretty bad. So what Pascal and her group had to do was to try to reduce these unethical responses by actually training on them to not use them and getting some good results there, hopefully. And here's some other stuff on, I'm almost done now. Here's some stuff on the ethics of empathy. It's a book, and I don't really agree with everything that he's saying, because I guess I'm an academic and I like to do research, but they say that companies should be barred from analyzing what we say and how we say it. I don't really think that's going to happen. But of course, anybody who doesn't want a company to do that always has the option of opting out. And they also, this guy also says that such systems could be used by police to determine arrests, or by banks for mortgage acceptance. Actually, banks are even now identifying whether they're going to accept a mortgage from someone by how they talk. It's unfortunate, but true. That has been shown to be the case. And that's not good either. And some people have been able to point this out to them so that they're not doing it anymore. But there are some beneficial uses, like call centers can send angry people to helpful staff. Tracking health and wellness, like Amazon Halo is doing, is a good thing. And even making song recommendations. So there are good things and bad things you can do with an empathetic agent. And you just have to be careful not to invade anyone else's privacy if they feel bad about it. Okay, what still needs to be done? Well, there are a bunch of things, and I'm not going to go over them too much. But we do need to do a lot more nonverbal behavior as well as verbal behavior. There was a really interesting work, and it's the only work I know that's actually good work on empathy in speech, in conversation between people in an Italian call center. And of course, it was only in Italian. So that's the only speech analysis of empathy I've seen. And they found that pitch and intensity is lower in empathetic speech, which doesn't surprise me much. You don't talk in a high pitch and you don't talk very loud. So, but I think there may be a lot more things to it than just that. So this is our current work. We're identifying also the acoustic, prosodic, and lexical features, but we're doing, as far as I know, the first work on speech-based empathy. And we'll examine all these, the various things that we always examine, and see which are the most important. We also want to see how these align with text, gesture, and facial expressions. So we're actually collecting a very large data set of videos, empathetic videos, and non-empathetic videos, so that we can say this is good and this is bad. Also, we just were talking about this morning. We want to see whether empathy is different when you're talking to one person versus when you're talking to a crowd. And when are you talking to a crowd? If you're a politician, if you're a manager, if you're maybe a religious person, you would be talking, at least on YouTube, to a crowd, right? And how is it different when you can't actually see the other person and truly understand their feelings, but you kind of have your own idea of what they are? So anyhow, we're going to check into that too. So here's our goals. We're collecting a very large corpus. We're having it rated by users for a lot of when we collect the demographic features for a lot of different personality issues that people have been using in social science to rate interpersonal reactivity. And we're going to do various things. They're going to rate them from text only, from audio and text, and from the full multimodal data. And we want to develop, of course, deep learning models to identify empathy in multiple modalities. And eventually, we're planning to make this corpus freely available through the Linguistic Data Consortium so that everybody has a chance to look at it, maybe do better, build better models than we did. That's fine. And here, this is my last slide. Some other questions we want to explore. This is something really interesting. As I mentioned before, we do want to identify different users' cultural norms and how this influences not only how they speak empathetically, but how they react to it. Make good use of conversational history, of course. Think more about the ethical issues, and eventually we would like to create multimodal agents that can do it all. So that's it. Thank you very much. And thanks to all the colleagues who provided great information on their agents and other people's agents and avatars and rapport and empathy. So thank you. I can have people in the room.
Great. So it's wonderful to have an empathetic response to in this in-person setting. So now
Good
really
point.
open for the question from the floor, the audience here, as well as on the Zoom. On the Zoom, we have Libby is checking any question you can type to the chat, right? Or is just the question answer? And anyone here, you can raise your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, because I can't see the chat. Yes.
So I have 3 questions.
Mhm.
First is slide 21, where we are trying to measure how well a person is empathetic in a conversation. There's a point about depth of disclosure of personal information, but isn't it concerning privacy? Like a person is very private, so they don't want to give out personal information in the conversation, but they still can be empathetic.
Well, that was what they were found with the empathetic avatar, that people were much more willing to give out their personal information to them. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but sometimes, like if you're talking to a psychologist or someone like that, and they're very empathetic, you do tend to, maybe not the first meeting you have, but as it goes along, you tend to tell them more and more and more about yourself. But you know, that kind of means that maybe the first conversation is not going to be the best one. So you have to keep going. And how you keep going and know it's with the same person is pretty important, right? Yeah.
So I have 2 more questions.
Yes.
Slide 48.
Yes.
There's a chatbot which is trying to correct the incorrect responses from the user. So the chatbot is actually like the user says the men and women are not equal. The chatbot says they are equal. So it's like the conversation is not empathetic, but the chatbot is actually right in the suggestions it starts doing.
Those were the ones that they changed to.
Okay.
When they started, they didn't have those. So some of those were bad and some of them they managed to fix, but some of them are really bad. And they knew it because people told them.
Thanks.
Okay, anyone else here? Yes.
I have a couple of questions. One, referring to Wobot,
Yeah.
one for the psychologist. I'm curious what has happened with it now. Is it like, I thought a good idea might be to kind of offer it as a prescription. So when you, after seeing a psychologist or psychiatrist, they could then choose to.
That's a thought, yeah. It's still live, it's still going on. You can still check it out. They have tried to, I might not have been able to mention this, but they have tried to collect other information as well so that they would know more about the user, but it's still there. You can still, you could just go to the Stanford website and look for Wobot. And you can even call it.
Yeah, try it out.
Yeah, I did that once. Yeah, I'm not sure it knew where I was or not, but okay.
Yeah, the other question was about the WAS, the healthcare, the SimSensi one about preferring the chatbot over the humans. And I'm curious if there was like some explanation for that. Like, was there a particular aspect to the humans? Were they doctors and so they were busy and so people felt guilty? Or,
no, what what these people found when they asked people why they, because they did ask them why they preferred, and they just said it seemed easier to talk to the robot than it did to a human and display the personal information. So, yeah.
Easier, just, I don't know, that's also just seems kind of vague, like, is it
Easier for them to do?
emotionally just kind of
Yeah.
open? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably true. Has anybody ever interacted with a, no. A lot of people who do that in chat will say the most incredibly horrible things to them. I mean, as we know. And so they just don't care because they don't think that this is going to affect anything at all.
Just kind of like no consequences.
It's, yeah, it's not going to make the chatbot dislike them.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are the easy, if you really get mad and want to talk to somebody, be mad, chatbot. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
So Julia, you have a number of questions in the webinar chat.
Well, this was one question. We'll quickly do this.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's just a terminology question. So I read a biography about Dr. Raman Kadubi. She founded the company Effectiva. And
Oh, Affectiva, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that she worked on like an emotional AI software where she helps autism, like kids with autism, like be more empathetic. I was just wondering, is that like emotional AI? Is it like interchangeable with empathetic agents?
Could be, but dealing with autistic kids is going to be quite different empathetically than dealing with a non-autistic person.
Oh, I see.
But so you'll have to have special training. You'll have to create a special bot for that.
Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, I know someone who worked for them. So,
Yeah?
okay, yeah, we can talk later.
Okay.
Okay, any questions?
Yes. So this one is from Emily. This is regarding the survey that you showed earlier in your presentation. Emily is wondering, would you say the most common ways of expressing empathy are necessarily the most effective ways? And how would you measure their efficacy?
Oh, the survey she's talking about with all those different categories of, and what was the question again? Sorry.
Would you say the most common ways of expressing empathy are necessarily the most effective?
Well, not from that survey, if we're talking about the different categories they had, because I don't think those were very empathetic conversations. The more empathetic ones were the less often expressed in the creation of that corpus. So yeah, I wouldn't. That's my answer. No.
Okay, and we have another question from Sri. This is in regards to the slide called "What do we need to identify from the user?" How do we gauge some of the identified items when we are working remotely?
I can go back to that slide, but I totally understand. So let's, but we can figure out what do we need to. Sorry, taking me. Okay. So I think when we're working remotely, we can still, well, look at us now. We're on Zoom. So we can still collect a lot of data, right? Certainly the input that they produce, what they say. Now collecting their mood, we do have ways of detecting different emotions. Topic, people have always been, for years, been doing topic analysis. Dialogue acts a bit more challenging, but we could still do those. So I think those things probably, when we're working remotely, you can collect. I mean, look at the YouTube videos. They're producing things that are remote, right? But they're producing empathetic videos. Now, how empathetic they are is going to be for the ratings of the people who see them. Yeah.
So we're running out of time, but I'll just ask this last question.
Okay.
1 minute left. This is from Akari. how can recent advances in AI and machine learning help us improve human-machine interactions? That's a big question.
They can do a lot. They just need the data to work on. And that's what we're trying to produce when we collect our empathetic speech data. That's my answer. Okay.
Great. And there are more questions later on. We can copy and send it to Julia. If they want to
Oh,
contact
okay.
Julia, they can also send
Sure.
by email, right?
Yeah, you can just save the chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. It's wonderful. Thank you so much, Julia.
Uh,
Thank you for everyone for participating.